watching Cablevision, Channel 14, local origination programming, your hometown network.
Welcome to Mind Over Matter. Today, my guest is Dr. Bruce Mermelstein, who is president of Comprehensive Outpatient Services, Inc., and we're going to talk about privatization of mental health services. And perhaps, Bruce, we could begin by talking about privatization and how we got from there to here.
Good question. As you, I'm sure, of all people know, George, most of us would probably agree that privatization started well over a decade or more ago in this state as well as many other states throughout the country, as states were trying to curtail their costs that they were spending for various segments of the delivery of human services, mental health being just but one. So privatization, as we now use that term, really now impacts not just mental health services, but many different segments of the whole umbrella of human services. So starting from the desire on government's part to reduce the amount of expenditure that they were seeing that they were putting forth for mental health care, as well as other human service endeavors, they got the idea that if they could begin to carve out, parcel out some of those services and contract them out to various vendors, agencies, companies, private companies, that the goal was to provide the care that was needed to be provided to those that were needing to receive that care, at the same time keeping the cost level or hopefully even begin to reduce the expenditures over a period of time, rather than seeing their budgets climbing and escalating as they had.
So we're both old enough to be a bit cynical. Was it driven by monetary concerns alone? Do you think that there was some genuine thought about privatization as an improvement in service delivery?
I think in its initial inception, I think certainly those were the two of the dual goals that were espoused. Whether or not one had any more weight over the other is certainly up for conjecture, but certainly governments were of the mind that they just weren't able to manage the services as effectively, they thought, as an outside agency or outside company could do. So that their belief was that they would get better organized system, delivery of care, at a cheaper cost. So a more cost-effective, more efficient, better delivered system of care.
So would it be fair to say, just on the cost side anyway, that the pie has gotten smaller since the beginning of this process?
Hard to know whether the pie has gotten any smaller because you have to take so many variables into account. I always have a difficult time answering a question like that because you also have to look at need, and has the need changed in the population over that period of time, and what would have happened if the same system would have been in place, would be in place today as it was 10, 15, or 20 years ago. But having said that, I think that there are still a number of positive things one can say today, as well as a number of problems that we're all facing because of those changes.
Okay, so some of the positives?
Some of the positives, there really is an attempt on the state, on using this state as an example, to really examine and look at the delivery of care that's being given to clients, to citizens of the Commonwealth. There wasn't necessarily that same degree of inspection of the care, say 20 or 30 years ago. So there is an accountability factor that's there today that is felt by everyone, and rightfully so. That might not have been there to the same extent a couple of decades ago. So I think that that's a plus that can only serve in the client's need ultimately.
So you're suggesting the government couldn't look at itself so much, but it's easier.
It's a little hard to do that.
It can look at you
Yeah.
as a vendor.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think that there's been more an attempt, a real honest attempt to develop some standards, to really hold people to hold vendors, hold providers, hold practitioners to a certain level of care that wasn't as defined, wasn't as clearly defined. It's a couple of decades back.
Okay.
So I
Other
think
positives?
Other positives, there's more of an integration of care in some areas, for some, affecting some individuals, some groups. Today, things were more set up more as fiefdoms, as you may remember, and so there wasn't, due to lack of competition, because the system was its own unto its own, there really wasn't necessarily a blending or a merging of organizations that could lend their expertise across boundary lines, so to speak. Now those boundary lines have been dissolved, which in some cases can prove to be a positive element.
Well, let me be a devil's advocate, though. I mean, there are 1,200 vendor corporations in Massachusetts, so wouldn't that suggest sort of a system where there could potentially be a lot of discontinuities?
Certainly that's a danger and a pitfall, no question about that. I think, therefore, it behooves the mental health system to try to ensure that there is a balance and an integration of care. Given the large number of organizations or providers that are out there in the sea of delivery, so to speak, the ocean of the delivery system, it's up to the larger system to make sure that there is a level of accountability and that there is a proper integration. Not an easy task.
Okay. So you're actually suggesting that maybe there's more integration with the privatization, but I have a memory that goes back to a time when the funding was consolidated in catchment areas, and we were all sort of charged with the mission of going out into the communities and providing comprehensive care. We didn't have to worry about pay or mix and whether somebody had insurance or the right kind of insurance. We could just go out and do what I call God's work, and we were accountable, but it was more how we spent our time, not so much whether we were productive around, say, the insurance industry. So I'm surprised you suggest that perhaps things are more comprehensive. Your program is called Comprehensive Outpatient Services. Dwell on the comprehensive aspect of that for a moment, because I'm intrigued by that.
Well, we try to bring together all the disparate elements that are around in assessing an individual within the context of the family and the community that they live in. So the attempt always is to bring together as many different aspects that are needed to provide a comprehensive delivery plan for that client and or family. We treat the whole age spectrum, so especially when we're working with children and adolescents, we're talking about a fairly wide system, because that has to include the family as well as other supports and community support systems.
So as we wind down, we have a few minutes. You're able, and how are you able, if so, to provide comprehensive services? Let us say someone I saw today, a very troubled 16-year-old, brought in by her mother, having a lot of trouble with school, having a lot of trouble with her anger, having a lot of trouble just basically settling down and growing up. How is your system able to respond to someone with needs like that?
How we would respond would be to assess everyone in the family, not just the 16-year-old. So by definition, that 16-year-old is living with some family members, whether it be a single parent or intact family. There might be other siblings that are involved that are also impacted by other family issues that the 16-year-old has also experienced. And once that assessment has been completed, develop a plan that will hopefully provide some positive change, not only for that identified youngster you just mentioned, but the other members of that family.
Now, if the plan, for example, suggested a need to visit her special school program, would your organization be able to do that? Is there funding for that?
Well, now you get to the other another whole kettle of fish when you raise the issue of funding. Funding depends on what that family's insurance capabilities are, or whether they're covered by Mass Health, or whether the vendor, the agency, is under some privatized contract with the state to deliver a certain segment of services.
So already, though, you have to hem and haw a little bit, and your flexibility is defined in part by what potentially you can get reimbursed for.
Absolutely. You're initially needing to do a triage, just based on what the resources are, the monetary resources are, that will be available in order to deliver an appropriate treatment plan.
And conceivably, I mean, apart from some of the individual and family work, maybe a medication evaluation, some of those entry-level services, beyond that, you might well have included in your treatment plan for this youngster some services that your organization or any private vendor organization might have some difficulty providing?
Yes, if there isn't the proper funding available. If there isn't a contract available that can pay for the ancillary services, the support services, the time taken to do the advocacy, then that becomes a problem.
So how, in the closing minute, does your organization respond to that problem? Services that clearly you don't have a funding source to provide.
Well, faced with those situations, if we are, then we would partner with other appropriate agencies in the area or where the family resides to link up with them and develop a collaborative plan where we're able to still offer what we can do given the resources that are available, and work in conjunction with somebody else that's also able to do another piece of the pie.
So here we're beginning, we started with the positives. Maybe after the break we can dwell a little bit on the negatives, the sort of the degree of difficulty of providing services in a private climate. So I think at this point we will take a break and return in a few minutes.
Life doesn't have to pass you by. Even the simplest exercises can help you maintain a level of fitness necessary for an active and independent lifestyle. For more exercise tips, write to Exercise, AARP Connections, Washington, D.C. 20049.
Does your company participate in team building workshops? Does it have an active charitable contribution program? If so, the American Cancer Society can help them achieve both goals with its 24-hour Relay for Life being hosted by Norwood High School on May 21st and 22nd. The Relay for Life is teams of 10 to 15 people gathering together and taking turns walking or running around the track to raise money to find a cure for cancer and support local community programs. The Relay is an excellent business forum for enhancing employee morale because teams can camp out around the track and enjoy the entire event while dancing to live music, playing games, or getting a massage, all while they're enjoying the camaraderie of friends, family, and coworkers. To find out more about the American Cancer Society's Relay for Life, call 508-584-9600 or visit our website at norwoodmall.com. That's 508-584-9600 or the website norwoodmall.com. The Relay for Life, it's about a community that takes up the fight.
Overgrown bushes and shrubs are more than just an eyesore. They make perfect hiding places for burglars. And they can keep you from seeing the world around you. See what you've been missing. By trimming back bushes from your windows, you can deter thieves and live safer and more independently. For more safety tips, call AARP Connections at 1-800-731-4447.
We were talking about the upside and downside, and at this point I think, Bruce, perhaps we could talk a little bit about some of the problems you have as a vendor corporation, president of a vendor corporation, in providing comprehensive services. I mean, I think we deal with a situation where people have good intentions, but many times there are impediments to really accessing care. Perhaps you could give us some examples and just talk a little bit about some of the pitfalls.
Sure. I think we would have to go, or I would have to go back to one of the first statements I made, the program, which is what was driving privatization to begin with, which is dollars. And so the challenge still for a provider today, probably even more so than ever before, still reverts back to the dollars. And you need to follow, as someone I knew very well used to say, you need to follow the dollars. The issues all relate to that one central theme, and they run as follows. The state system has turned over a large number of services to privatized contracts, but with one proviso. The assumption, major assumption, is that a good deal of services, especially in the outpatient field, can be delivered through third-party insurance or Medicaid, Mass Health, as it's referred to in this state.
As an insurance.
As another source of revenue that is there to cover the cost, reimbursable cost of services that would be delivered as part of the comprehensive plans I was describing, or we were discussing just earlier. However, there's one pitfall in that, one central pitfall in that, and that is that there's a concept that came into being within the last decade or more, and that's managed care. And managed care has had a major impact on the entire health field, and certainly in our corner of the health field, the mental health delivery system. And it's affected us as follows. Not everyone is automatically a provider in any particular third-party insurance company under a managed care regime today. So that a particular vendor who might have wanted to treat a particular client and might be very good at delivering that service might not be able to do so, even if they had a state contract to do that, because they wouldn't be able to access the third-party insurance under the managed care company if they were not accepted into that panel. So being shut out from or limited in your delivery of service in the private sector is one variable. The second is a limitation of the care. Unlike the old system that you were referring to before, when there was state blocks, DMH, for providing outpatient services, for example, that doesn't exist any longer, and the reliance on the third-party insurance behooves the vendor to be able to bill for that service on a fee-for-service model. Well, if there's a limited amount of care that the insurance company or the managed care company will allow, then it still has to go somewhere. And the somewhere has to be, or would normally be, the state contract. But if the state contract is limited to the extent that the expectation is that there'll be a certain amount of third-party reimbursement, the two begin to bump into one another.
Okay, so privatization really does get you, at least in mental health servicing, into the whole fee-for-service model.
As it's
And-
presently designed, yeah.
as it's presently designed. And the devil's in the details. You talked about unless you have money for, quote, ancillary services. But it's those ancillary services which really are key to a comprehensive outpatient treatment plan.
Absolutely.
I went to the high school the other day to meet with a guidance counselor around a shared client. There's no way I could ever get paid to do that. I mean, I suppose I could write a grant or, but the fee-for-service model doesn't permit that kind of flexible servicing. That must be a problem for you.
That is definitely a problem, and the one way around it that a number of agencies and providers have found is to try to partner their service or piggyback their service on other streams of revenue, i.e. state contracts. So that aspect of privatization is helpful only insofar as that vendor is able to mix and match. And if you are able to take some funds from a state contract to service that 16-year-old that you described earlier, as well as being able to bill for services under a third-party contract or mass health system, then you can deliver a comprehensive system. If not, it poses great strain and difficulty.
Well, it's very easy to come to the end of the world where then everything falls off, because some of what I might propose would impact on the school, which is already stretched in terms of its ability to provide social services to needy teenagers, for example. And I keep, and I'm sure you do too, you keep bumping into delivery systems that are stretched to the max in terms of doing what they're mandated to do,
Right.
unable to do a lot of the other creative programming that you and I think would be helpful, and they agree. How do we get around that? Or how do we, we can partner and look for somebody who has a grant, but maybe there are significant areas where, because of the money being cut back, the money's not there.
The only solution short of that is to do as much advocacy as one can do, I think, to be proactive politically in as many different ways as one can, to marshal forces to try to bring about some positive change so that there is an allocation of resources that's appropriate to meet the needs of the population you're servicing. That's a difficult thing to do, but necessary.
Good concept. Your organization had a children's contract at one point, and apparently really got some high praise for the work you were doing. I guess I want to shift gears a little bit around the privatization and look at the whole concept of vendor instability. When I worked at Bridgewater State Hospital, I worked for 4 different vendors over the course of the 8 years that I was there. And that's because these contracts would go out to bid, and a different group would underbid the reigning group, and our employment was always fairly secure, but there was always that uncertainty as vendors came and vendors went, and of course each time the vendors shifted, the pie did get smaller. What has your experience been with what I'm calling vendor instability?
Well, my experience at present is that I think more recently, I think the system is trying to recognize that, and that in the newer contracts that are being put out for bid from various parts of the human service system, they are going out for longer periods of time than they had been previously, so that whoever gets, there's the good news and the bad news. If you're competing, if you're in the realm of competing with one another and you are not selected for a new program, then you've lost out on being able to rebid against that for many years hence. On the plus side, whoever does get that contract awarded to them knows that they've got a good chunk of time to develop a program, to institute the proper guidelines and structure, and hold on to hopefully a stable workforce that can provide the kind of comprehensive care we're talking about.
So you think the vending process has become more sensitive to some of these concerns?
It appears that way to me just more recently in this past year. At least that's what I'm noticing now.
Okay. If you care to, why do you think your organization didn't retain its children's service contract?
I frankly don't know. We did have a day program
Yes.
contract that you're referring to, and I know we had shared some stories about that because you went through a story of your own with the program you were involved with in another totally different community. I'm really not sure, George, to be perfectly honest with you. We do have, our company still has other state contracts, and we continue to do business with various state agencies in addition to a whole wide range of the managed care contracts we do. Not really sure to this day, not really sure what that was about.
See, what we've seen in South Boston is that yesterday's priority fades and gets sort of displaced by what the Department of Mental Health now defines as new priorities. The problem with that is not in the definition of the new priority, but I know from working in South Boston for 30 years that the old priorities don't go away. The needs that are reflected in those priorities don't go away, and yet in South Boston they're very clearly taking away some money that we had to allow us to provide some flexible outpatient servicing, and now they want that money put into a different kind of program, an excellent kind of program, but they're taking money away from one necessary program to fund another one.
Yeah, I'm not sure what also, I'm not someone that's intimately knowledgeable of how those decisions get made, but there seems to be a difference, a marked difference from area to area and region to region. So I'm not entirely sure who is making those decisions, and that's why I referred to before in terms of grassroots political action that one can take in terms of influencing some of those decisions, because there doesn't seem to be just one statement or one grid that's being placed out there. I think it really is up to each individual section of the state, so to speak, that's developing its own model of care.
Okay. And maybe in Boston things get a little more politicized because of the nature of the terrain, and
Could be.
Maybe it's not quite so competitive in other areas. Well, that's nice to hear. Nice to hear. Okay, well, why don't we take a break, and perhaps after the break we can look at some of the challenges in providing services with the privatization.
Good game, ladies!
Yeah, you too.
Okay, who's up for lunch?
Oh, sorry. I gotta take my husband to the doctor.
Is everything okay?
Oh, yeah. It's a colon cancer test. Pretty routine, really.
But he's so young. Isn't Tim barely 50?
52. And actually, he should have had this about 2 years ago. But, you know...
I'm supposed to get screened too, but I don't have the time either.
We're all busy, but if you're 50 and older, you should make time to get tested for colon cancer, which kills over 50,000 people a year and strikes women nearly as often as men. But you can beat colon cancer and even prevent it if it is detected early. People have all sorts of reasons for not getting tested. They may be too embarrassed or have no symptoms or family history. But there is one powerful reason to get screened for colon cancer. It can save your life. So please get tested now.
Call 1-800-ACS-2345.
Well, so let's continue with some of the problems and some of the pitfalls in providing services, because I know you well, I know you, and I know you're very interested in providing a wide range of services. And I guess the question really would be, what makes it easy, but I think more to the point, what makes that difficult these days?
Well, I guess it's always easier to talk about what's difficult rather than what's easy.
Right.
What does make it difficult is some of what we were discussing before, which is the major shifts and changes in the world of insurance and third-party coverage that would have allowed for certain services to be delivered years ago, as well as the change in the state system, the safety net, if you were, that was around in had a certain look, certain definition a couple of decades ago that is not in evidence today. It's a different look. And so the challenges today are rooted in that, are rooted in the change in the terrain, are rooted in the fact that it is necessary to spend an inordinate amount of time just trying to figure out what the resources are, the monetary resources are, that will be available in order to deliver a range of services to that client and family.
So apart from being a clinician, as president of your organization, how much of your time would you say is beating the bushes and looking for creative funding streams?
So I guess in a 24-hour day, it takes up about 23 hours.
Really?
Yeah.
So that's really a kind of an outgrowth of privatization, that because you're one vendor corporation, all the other vendor corporations are looking at Compass and, the Goods and Services Bulletin and looking for ways to basically provide wraparound services. So, as a friend would say, it's a dog-meat-dog world, and there's a tremendous competition. And if you're not successful in getting some of these contracts, what then?
That certainly puts that organization in a very difficult position. Just as it would put any mental health practitioner in difficult position if you're not able to access the mental health, the managed care panels that I spoke about before. However one feels about managed care as a concept, if you're not enrolled in those panels, you cannot treat a large segment of the population.
Has your corporation been fairly
At
successful?
this point, we have been fairly successful, but it has taken a lot of knocking on the doors repeatedly, so that we are basically in most of the major managed care panels that are around today. But that takes a great deal of time and effort and perseverance. It's not an easy thing to accomplish.
Well, I know as an individual, I'm on lots of panels. It takes hours to apply when occasionally I'm invited to join yet another one. It literally can take, I think, just to get the application completed and to round up the credentialing documents, probably 4 or 5 hours minimum. Then there's sometimes interviews, there's sometimes obviously re-credentialing, and it's not a pretty picture, as a friend would say.
It's not a pretty picture, but there's one winner that I always say, and that's the paper mill.
Okay.
Because the amount of paper that we have to deal with for these matters is astronomical. Astronomical.
But it is true that for the consumer, that there are instances where they shift insurance and therefore they lose providers and they're forced to go to a different network because
Happens
of
all
this
the time.
problem.
Happens all the time. We used to be on the other end until we were successful in gaining access to so many of those panels. And now we're experiencing it from the other end, where clients are coming to us because they wouldn't be able to go to someone else for that same reason.
And then even when you're in a panel, might it be fair to say, because I know it's true in at least one of the locations I work in, that the rates of reimbursement that these companies are willing to pay probably doesn't cover the cost of delivering the service.
I think it's fair to say, I think it's fair to say
Yeah.
that we as an industry are not compensated
Right.
to the degree to which we should be compensated. And that also goes to one of the major challenges that faces any organization today in terms of maintaining a workforce, an appropriate, hardworking, dedicated, and professional workforce, given the rates of reimbursement that we're able to receive.
And compounding the problem is if you elect to work with a covered but resistant client, who pays for the missed appointment or the several missed appointments while somebody is ambivalating about whether they'll accept services or not?
No one but the client.
Yeah. If you bill the client directly.
Right.
But you usually end up paying the salary of the person who's
Exactly.
sitting there waiting. The managed care company doesn't pay for
No.
missed appointments.
No one will do
So
that.
There's not much sharing of risk.
No, not when it comes to that. Although I must say that that has been, at least there's been a lot of talk about that issue in this past year, particularly with the Medicaid managed care company in this state has done a good deal of talking about that with providers, is trying to come up with some solutions or sharing of solutions that various organizations are coming up with, grappling with that problem, because that is a very significant problem, particularly with some of the populations we're dealing with, where the no-show rate, late cancellation rate, as you know, can run very high, and that's a real problem.
I mean, when you say very high, I know, again, one of the agencies in Boston, it typically runs 10 to 12%, which means that you have allocated clinical time that it is basically not being utilized. It still costs the vendor, but it's not getting reimbursed in terms of a service delivery.
Right.
Okay, so that's a problem. Are there others?
Well, again, we go back to what we are reimbursed.
The rate.
Right, and it seems that the message over and over again to us as a group is that our service is really not valued to the extent that I personally, and maybe someone else would say I have a vested interest because I run a company, so therefore, of course, he would feel that way. But I think if you asked most people that work in the mental health field today, that they would agree that the compensation is just not commensurate with the work that we do. It's serious work that's being done, very serious work. We're dealing with people's lives that can have a very positive impact, that can affect them and their family for decades to come. It could also have a very negative impact, as we know. Sometimes we're dealing with life and death issues.
Now, you suggested a sympathetic ear from the partnership around missed appointments. Is there much sensitivity to this other matter, that the rates of reimbursement really aren't consistent with costs?
That I don't see forthcoming anywhere. In fact, there's just a recent, just received this week or last week, there's been a brand new change, retroactive already to last month, that outpatient vendors will now be paid in a different methodology from Division of Medical Assistance for those geriatric clients that have both Medicare and Medicaid assistance. The outpatient rates for Medicaid, for example, in this state have essentially remained the same since 1989. So we're about to enter, as everyone is talking about, the millennium, and this July would mark 10 years that the Commonwealth has held outpatient mental health rates exactly the same. In fact, 4 cents an hour less today than it was in 1989.
Interesting.
For an hour of individual therapy.
Yeah.
That's pretty astounding. I don't think you can get a plumber for the same rate today that you could have 10 years ago.
So that's a big problem. I mean, what needs to be done about that? What can possibly be done? Obviously, managed care. You know, when you talk about becoming a member of a panel, I know one of the things you do is you sign a contract saying that the rates they pay are acceptable. I don't know that any of us look at the small print. You do probably, I don't. But you don't have any choice. If you don't accept the rate, you don't become a member of that panel. So we're agreeing to accept a rate that almost a priori we know is not going to reimburse the cost of providing the service.
I think some of the solutions require, on the part of the provider, to engage in, how do I say, out-of-the-box thinking, an ability to adapt to these tremendous stresses and strains that we're all experiencing, but come up with not just new solutions, but new ideas that may have never been thought of before, in terms of how to deliver a service at a cost-effective way.
Like
Developing new program ideas that are not necessarily ones that one would have even thought of doing 10 years ago, or aren't in the traditional sense outpatient therapy, but are a way of bringing revenue into that organization from another route, if you will, that helps to augment the delivery of service that's already being provided.
Well, you're not talking about bake sales, though.
No,
so...
I'm not talking about bake sales, although that not necessarily
Right.
not necessarily a bad idea. But what I'm talking about is thinking of other ways of delivering service and being able to charge for that.
Okay. Well, you know, Bruce, maybe after the break, in our final segment, we can kind of look at the challenges ahead and maybe talk a little bit about what some of those creative possibilities might be. Because I agree with you, absent those, we really are stuck with a rigid system that allows us to sort of partly respond, like to that young woman I alluded to earlier, but really preclude us from responding in a way that is commonsensical, but not necessarily reimbursable. So perhaps in the closing segment, we'll talk about some of the challenges.
I have diabetes.
I have diabetes.
Diabetes.
It's something I share with 16 million other Americans.
I know it can lead to more serious health problems.
So it's something I control.
I know I'm controlling my diabetes.
Because I know my blood sugar numbers.
I'm in charge of what I eat.
I'm getting regular exercise.
I'm taking my medicine and testing my blood sugar.
Controlling my diabetes makes a huge difference.
I feel better.
A lot better.
I have more energy.
I have peace of mind.
Because I'm going to be around for my family.
For my family.
My friends.
I'm going to be around for life.
For life.
Control your diabetes for life. Call 1-800-438-5383 to find out how.
You can see me now because you have your sight. It's a precious thing, sight. But if you're over 60 or black and over 40, there is something that could take it away. Glaucoma. Unless you discover it early through a dilated eye exam. If you're at risk, get a dilated eye exam at least every 2 years. Don't give glaucoma a chance.
What is in this package holds the key to longer life. Its secrets have been coveted since the beginning of time. Some think it's the original fountain of youth, but as valuable as it is, all the money in the world can't buy it because it's free. From the National Institute on Aging, the exercise guide for older people. Get your copy while they last. 1-800-222-2225.
So in the final segment, Bruce, let's talk about the challenges. And I guess the challenges translate, unfortunately, into money. And you alluded to creative funding streams. What are some of your thoughts about that, particularly as we face the next 10 years? Your corporation is about to celebrate its 10th...
the end of this year will be finish our first decade.
10 years,
right.
excellent.
We started
Congratulations.
Thank you. We started in February of 90, so we're ending our 10th year this year.
So to get to 20,
yes,
what do you need to do?
What do we need to do? I think we need to always be open to new ideas. Several things that are new things that are around today, the technology that's around today, the internet, utilizing new resources that weren't around a couple of decades ago. I think it is essential, the old adage, in strength there are numbers, that it is really essential today that you cannot be alone, and that to just compete, to butt heads one-on-one or one-on-two and so forth is not really going to be a win-win or a win-loss. It's ultimately going to be a loss for everyone. That the way to succeed will have to require consortiums. You were describing something of that nature in a break period to me before, and I think that's what's really going to be needed and necessary. Maybe each member of that consortium takes away a smaller piece of the pie than they may have if they had gotten that themselves, but they are more assured of getting a piece of the pie that can be developed for their niche, their particular area of expertise, so that everyone should not be trying to have their MRI station and their being able to do the whole 9 yards of everything, but maybe begin to specialize in certain areas and form consortiums and form networks that will be able to go after large contracts with private as well as public funding sources that will be funneled through one contracted entity that then will be fanned out amongst the members of that consortium. I think that's one of the ways that people can think creatively, go after revenue streams in new ways, but it requires breaking down some barriers of territoriality and being willing to accept the fact that you're not in this alone, that you need to be sharing. Sharing
So
the
you're
process.
suggesting on like the macrocosm with care group and partners and mergers and acquisitions with the teaching hospitals, the vendors have to figure out ways to work, merge or collaborate or form?
I think at the very least collaboration is essential. Whether there's merging is in the way that some of the hospitals have gone is maybe another matter, but I think collaboration is absolutely essential, in a formal sense, collaboration. I don't just mean swapping affiliation letters and as people tend to do, but really collaborating in a very specific, programmatic way that can lead to developing a comprehensive range of services, going after revenue streams, as I said before, to both public and private sector segments, and sharing that pie.
But the pie does get, I think the pie gets smaller. I mean, there is a bottom line where creativity notwithstanding, government has to decide to invest more in risk populations. We could take DSS as an example. Now, here's a Republican administration that now finally recognizes the need to add a couple hundred more social workers to the delivery system. I don't know that the mental health community gets the same public attention, but at some point there has to be a hue and cry that even though you're very creative and you're one of the more creative people I know, at some point you are competing for smaller sums of money that are then getting smaller over time. So how do we go about that? Because part of your suggestion is that we go forward to the past, and recreate some of what we used to have.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily espousing a profound idea. I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel, but rather suggest that a formula that might be beneficial to people as we look forward. It is a very difficult, exceedingly difficult time that we're in as members of the mental health community, providers in the mental health community, trying to address the needs of the clients and families that we all treat with the shrinking pie and the limited resources that are there, and all the other factors and variables that we touched on before. It's a tremendous amount of challenge.
And hidden from view, I think, are populations that we don't typically see, but where I think our ability to provide services has become incredibly compromised. Now, I know that to be the case in the jails and in the prisons. I think it to be the case, say, for the homeless. You know, that it's just become virtually more difficult over time to provide services to those several populations I just alluded to who are, I think, by everybody's definition, at risk. Mm-hmm. Do you see, in terms of the challenges ahead, creative ways of impacting on those populations?
Well, that's a challenging question in and of itself. I don't have an immediate suggestion or idea, except to say that probably would require some research to develop a model of care that one could envision, would be able to bring about some positive change. Given the terrain that we are dealing with today, what would that model of care look like, and what would be needed to feed it? What would be necessary to sustain it?
Well, I think one of the things that has to shift over time is the expensive reimbursement mechanisms, because each company has its own procedures for prior authorization, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I guess in the waning moments, I know we're both very partial to the single payer system. Certainly one of the challenges ahead is to cut the costs of providing the services, which in large measure today are administrative costs. Your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that statement more, George. The administrative costs that befall all agencies today, just to deal with the mechanics of being able to deliver that hour of the clinician. In order for that clinician to deliver that hour of service, it requires a support staff team to maybe spend an hour or two in order for that clinician to spend that first hour to sit with that patient or visit with that family. So something needs to be done, and that is clearly a challenge not just for individual providers but for the industry as a whole.
The Picker Institute studies problems like this, and I've had the opportunity of getting to know Harvey Picker quite well, and I was talking with him not too long ago about why it is that 25 cents on the healthcare dollar is lost basically to these kinds of administrative supports. And he looked at me and he says, "Why do you say 25 cents?" And his guesstimation was that it was more like $1 for $1, that it literally cost $1 in administrative cost to provide $1's worth of clinical services. That's scary. You know, if it's closer to $1 and not even, because, you know, the Canadian system, we both have had an opportunity to look at it, and, you know, it's like 2 to 3 cents on the dollar is they just pay bills. It goes to one source, they pay the bill, then they do these post audits. That clearly is, I think, one of the big challenges. You know, we have 1,200 vendor corporations. You've suggested perhaps collaborations, maybe in some instances mergers. But we have in this country, I'm going to say 600, but I'm not sure that's accurate. It's probably more different payors, different insurance companies, and they all have their own
idiosyncratic way.
Absolutely, with duplication of 24-hour prior authorization lines and paperwork that the requirements are different one from another. Do you see that changing at all?
I'm not seeing that changing in the near future. I think a number of us had our hopes up 5 years ago. It'll be 5 years this fall that the National Health Plan was unveiled and was before Congress, and then took a giant disappointing nosedive. And while that was not at all the be-all and end-all and going to be the final cure for this runaway problem, I think in fairness it was a first attempt to do a major revamping of the system as we presently know it. Something like that, if not as radical as that as the first step, but something akin to that is absolutely necessary, in my opinion. Otherwise, we're just going to keep spinning our wheels, going round and round in circles, having people spend countless hours chasing their tails. And it's driving everyone batty.
So your choice is really, in the few seconds remaining, more for less or less for more? I mean, what are the choices?
Well, the choices are doing the best you can, recognizing that you have limitations, appreciating that, but at the same time also appreciating the person you're sitting with is worth something, and that you're dedicated to providing the best possible care you can to that individual and that family.
Sound like my mother. Well, listen, Bruce, thank you very much for being here, and
My pleasure.
very much appreciate it, and the Norfolk Alliance appreciates it, so thank you.
Thank you.
We should keep